Hello and welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries for a highly requested ink video that I'm finally just going to pull the trigger on and do it. This is going to be all about the chroma shading inks that are some of my absolute favorites. I do have 18 inks that I want to swatch today, so we're going to be here for a minute. And I tried my best to pick colors that I use the most. This is by no means all of the chroma shaders out there. There are several dozens, if not hundreds at this point. These are just the ones that I am a huge fan of, have bought multiple samples of, or even have bottles of. I actually have mostly bottles today. But yeah, let's just get started. I'm gonna do probably like, it's mainly greens and purples, so like greens and then purples. So we're gonna try to keep the color families together. But the first one I want to start off with is Citrus Black by Platinum. This was probably one of the first chroma shading inks I ever introduced myself to, and it is still very much a favorite to this day. So the coolest thing about this ink in particular is it starts off as this bright, sunny yellow, and as it dries, it shades black. Like, and I'm not kidding, like almost all the way black. It is so fun to watch. When writing with it, it's just entertaining because you start off bright and then it gets darker as you go down the page. It's just a really exciting, fun chroma shading ink, and it's kind of unusual because I don't think there's any other yellows out there that really shade this dark, at least that I have found. Next up, we have one of the many Birmingham Pen Company inks I'm going to be talking about today, and this is Antique Sepia. And this one's not as crazy of a chroma shader as some of the other ones I'm going to be talking about today, but it does have a really cool, almost green to brown shift, which is very common in a lot of the colors today too. But this one is just really pretty because it almost has a beigey gray washed out look to it as well. I will say this ink is a bit dry in some pens, but flow-wise, it's still really incredible. I haven't had to doctor this bottle at all, and it does great. The only pens that I've really found it to be dry in are like my narwhal pens. Yeah, so it depends on the pen and the nib size probably for this one, but I do love the different kinds of beige and green shades that it has. Next up, we have another one by Birmingham Pen Company, and this one is Weeping Willow. And I find this one amazing because it starts off brown in some cases and then goes to green. And then it also starts off green sometimes and goes to brown. It has a different kind of uniqueness to it depending on the paper you use. And the flow on this one is absolutely fantastic. I love putting this in a 𝗦𝘁𝗶cie extra fine and just going to town on the page. Next up, I want to talk about Diamine Salamander. This is probably the darkest ink that I'm going to be talking about today, and it is also the only Diamine ink I'm going to be talking about today. I specifically picked only shading inks, no shimmer in shading, so that's why I'm not including any other Diamines, but this one is probably the most legible in terms of like darkness out of everything I'm talking about today. In terms of the shading on this one, it isn't super chroma shady. It's kind of chroma shady. It's just shady in general. It's a shady ink, guys. It's shady ink. Anyways, the color of this is a deep green, almost like a moss green. And in the spots that it does shade, it almost turns into a blue-black. Although it's not on every paper. I think it is very subtle, but it does, I do consider it to be a chroma shader just because it has that different tone to it in the shading bits. Next up, we have an ink that I recently got and am already very obsessed with, and this is Robert Oster's Earth. Basically another one from the series of Robert Oster Wind. I know they have a fire and a water as well, but Earth is the my moon, or my my star sign. I'm an Earth person, I guess, and I really was called to this, picked it up, and I'm very happy with it. So the color of this one is a bit more of an olivey green, green-brown, and it's lighter than some of the other olivey green browns that I have, but the shading in it goes a bit more towards that sandy beigey color again. There's a lot of inks like this out there, so I tend to collect multiple of the same color because I'm a huge fan. This one's not an exception at all. It's fantastic. Flow-wise, this ink is wonderful. I do think that a lot of the lighter kind of chroma shady inks like this do have a tendency to be dry, But this one I have found to just be really, really nice, and hence why I picked up a full bottle of it, and I've just been loving it ever since I got it. Next up, we have one of the famous Sailor shaders, and this is Ink Studio's 280. And this one is very similar again to Robert Oster Earth and even the Birmingham Pen Company Antique Sepia, in that it is that kind of lighter green color, and it does have a bit more of a brown shade. The cool thing about this ink is it looks completely different on different papers, which is very common with a lot of these Sailor chroma shading inks. I typically go for this one just because it's the color families I tend to lean towards, but there are several others from the Ink Studio line, from the Manyo line, from the 𝗦𝗵cie𝗽 line that are chroma shaders. I don't have enough space on 2 pages to cover all of those, but several of those inks are fantastic, and I would highly recommend trying them in sample form or even just going for a bottle if you think it is a color you really think you would like. Next up, we have Van Dieman's ink, which is a brand I am very much in love with right now. This is from their Encore line, and this is Lost Love Letters. This is actually my second sample, and I had a pen friend send me a sample, and at this point, I went ahead and bought a bottle. So this one is definitely a fast favorite at the moment. And I know a lot of you guys are going to come for me in the comments after you see me swatch this because it is a light ink, and I know I talk a lot of game at light inks because they're not very legible in certain pens. But the cool thing about this ink is it's just like the Sailors in that it looks completely different on different papers. But also with this one, it starts off very light, and as it dries, it darkens pretty decently, and I have found that it is legible in medium pens, at least for me. I haven't done any like serious writing with it. I've just done like some practice pages, but I love the shading in this because it's almost like a soft pale green to a warm yellow in some areas. I don't know, it's cool. There's also hints of pink in this and a little bit of like a brown beige situation going on. It's a beautiful color. I love the shading in it, and I definitely want to play around with it a lot more, hence why I have already purchased a full bottle of it. Next up, we have another really good shader, but I don't know if this one could technically be considered chroma shade, but this is 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏 Moss Park Green. So with this one, I say it may not be considered a chroma shader because the shading that it does have doesn't always go to the shade that I'm talking about. So on some papers, it goes to a gray shade, so it has like this nice mossy green color that goes to gray. It also has hints of beige in it. So it is kind of a chroma shader, but it's not always a chroma shader. So depending on the paper you're using, you may not get all of those fun colors coming out. It just really depends. This ink also can be a bit dry, which I do find is very common with Ferris inks. So you may want to add a bit of white lightning into this one and make it a little bit wetter to use. But overall, the color is really nice. It's soft. It's a great fall green color for me. And I don't know, it's a good one. I like it, even though some may not consider it to be a chroma shader. And the last green I'm going to talk about is Vinta Sirena. I believe this is also called Vinta Mermaid, maybe. I don't know. This is, again, like my second or third sample of this ink at this point. I probably need to buy a bottle. Yeah, it's a beautiful color. With this ink, it isn't just green. It also has a bit of a teal look to it, and again, has more of that chroma shading with gray. Although on some papers, I do find this one to pull a little bit of blue, a little bit of almost like a navy color through as well. Very, very interesting ink. There's even bits of pink that come out in this too. It's such a fun color, but like the Lost Love Letters by Van Dieman's, it is on the lighter side. So this one doesn't do super well for me unless it is in like a medium nib or bigger, but I still love it. And the flow on it's pretty decent too, being that it is a lighter ink. Moving on to the other side of the page here, I'm going to start off with my favorite pink of all time at this point, and I've tried a lot of pinks. This is Birmingham Pen Company's Magnolia Mirage, and I think this is my favorite pink specifically because it looks pink. Like there's no red that pulls through in this. If anything, it goes more purple in some areas, but the shading in this has like a purple halo and a bit of a gray to it as well. I really just enjoy this ink because the flow is great, the color's great, it just behaves well. I don't know, there's just something about this one. I really love it, and I don't know if I'll ever make it through this giant 100 ml bottle, but I've made it almost halfway, and I've sent samples and everything, so I don't know about this one. I may pick up a second bottle because I love it so much. I haven't really made a choice. Next up, we have a very famous chroma shader. This is Wearingeul's White Rabbit. I was gifted a sample of this from a pen friend and decided, you know what, I need a bottle of it just because it's such a weird ink. It's not super legible and everything, but I do want to swatch it for you guys because it's just a really interesting chroma shader. Also, quick tip, if you cannot get your caps off of the Wearingeul bottles, my hands are a little moist right now, use your grip, like your nib grip, or even something kind of rubbery to hold on to the caps, and it helps get the caps off a bit easier so you're not making a mess. So for the shading on this one, it starts off as pretty much a very, very, very pale orangey tan color. And as it dries, there's hints of pink, there's hints of red, there's hints of gray. This is such a cool, weird ink. It even looks like a bloody rabbit to me too at some point. It's such a weird color. I do find it to be a bit illegible in like extra fine and fine nibs for me personally, but medium and up, I think it would just be just fine, just like the Lost Love Letters and also Sirena on the other side of the page. Next up, we have another Van Diemen's ink, and this one I believe is called Woollarawarre Bennelong. It's part of their Voyager series, so I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I deeply apologize. But this ink is nuts. So ultimately, I would probably consider this ink to be a brown, but the shading in it has pink and green and gray and like orange and peach, and it's like a little mini rainbow inside of it. It's so cool, and the flow in this ink is phenomenal. I had a sample of this. I used it up immediately and just bought a bottle. I didn't even hesitate, and I'm glad I did, because when I bought this off of the Van Diemen's website, it was out of stock like right after I bought it. So I guess this is a popular one. It is beautiful though. The shading in it is fantastic. It's legible. The flow is great. I can't speak highly enough of this ink. I'm a huge fan. Next up, we have another Robert Oster ink, and this one is an Atlas Stationers exclusive. This is Polar Vortex. And this is another one of those inks that may not be considered a chroma shader, but to me it is because it looks different on different papers. So this one has a dusty, dark purple gray base, and in the shading it goes blue or pink or more gray. So again, depending on the paper, it looks a little bit different on this one. I do like this one as well because it's similar to like the Diamine Salamander in that it is a legible color, but this is an Atlas Stationers exclusive. So if you're not able to order from Atlas Stationers, you probably won't be able to find this one. Similar inks out there to this would probably be in the Sailor line of inks. I'm not going to go through any comparisons, but just if you're curious of something similar to this, check out Sailor. They probably have something very similar. Next up, we have another Robert Oster, and the last Robert Oster that I'm going to be sharing today, and this is the Wind ink. So cousin to the Earth, and I think it's funny that they're going to end up on like the same side of the page, like same placement on the page. But this was in my top 5 inks of 2024, and I'm still very much in love with this ink. So the color of this one is a base baby blue, even almost like a baby blurple in some cases, and it shades all the way over to baby pink, and it is so beautiful. I used this a lot in my Kaweco Broad and had the best time at seeing the different shades pull through in writing. It's a very lubricated ink as well. It's not dry by any means, and if I were to choose this one versus Romeo and Juliet by Robert Oster, I think I would pick Wind just because it's a bit more blue. But if you wanted something a bit more teal with a pink shade, definitely check out Romeo and Juliet, which is a very good contender for this ink. They're very close together, but definitely not the same. Next up, we have another Sailor ink, and this one's Sailor Manyo Fuji. And I feel like this ink is a pretty well-known chroma shader, and that it has a bit more of like a blue to purple to pink situation. There's a lot of Sailor inks out there, like I said, that have really great chroma shading. I just picked a few that I think I only picked 2 actually. No, I picked 3 that are just great for me personally. There's Sailor Manyo Neko Yanagi, which is another really good one, or it might be Narashiko. I do get the lines confused sometimes because they're very similar, but really you can't go wrong with a Sailor ink if you're looking for a chroma shader. They have several to choose from. And the third to last ink is going to be Birmingham Pen Company's Armadillo, which is just a crazy ink. And I received this one from pen friend Priscilla, and I definitely hope that someday they release a recipe for this one, because I'm just going to cherish the sample that I have for now. And this one is such a cool color because it starts off purple, and as it dries, it becomes more gray. On some papers, I've even had it a little bit more pink. It's just a really fun ink, and I think it's got a range of colors in it. I really want to do some chromatography at some point, and maybe I'll try these inks out and see what happens. But this ink is so cool, and the shade of it is very, very unique. I haven't really found a dupe for this one yet, but this is just a really cool purple to gray kind of ink situation. For the second to last ink, I have Sailor Ink Studios 252 here. This is the last Sailor I'm going to be talking about, and I definitely think it's a winner when it comes to chroma shading. So with this ink, it's super chroma shady because it starts off kind of like a gray pink color, and as it dries, it becomes more of a bright baby pink with hints of magenta and teal and maybe some green, but it still has a bit of a grayness to it. Such a fun color. I think if I were to pick a second favorite pink, it would probably be this one, just because the color is really interesting, although it doesn't really look that pink, unlike Magnolia Mirage, which looks pink. I don't know. This was just really cool. I love the shading in this one, although the flow on this one is slightly drier than I would like, but still, it's really nice. And the last ink I'm going to be talking about today is Birmingham Pen Company's Pennsylvania Fieldstone. And this one is much like the Birmingham Pen Company Armadillo in that it starts off as one color, and as it dries, it shifts a little bit. So for me, this one starts off a bit more of like a dusty pink, and as it dries, it turns more gray. But there's also hints of teal in this one as well. Really quite interesting. After laying this down and watching it dry next to Sailor Ink Studio 252, I'm happy to see that they're very similar, which gives me hope that if I can ever get more of Pennsylvania Fieldstone, I'll have a dupe that is close enough that I could probably get my fix. But Pennsylvania Fieldstone is wonderful in terms of it has great flow and it is a lighter color, but also it's just like the epitome of dusty pink to me because it has literal like gray and pink tones in the same ink. I don't know. It's just really, really beautiful. Okay, with that, I have all of the inks down that I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to be back probably in about 20-ish minutes, maybe less, depending on how fast these dry down, and we'll do some close-ups, and then I'll finish this out and talk a bit more about chroma shading little tidbits. Anyways, I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, I am back. Everything is completely dry now, so I'm going to zoom you guys in. We're going to talk about each color individually, and then yeah, let's just get into it. So starting off, we have Citrus Black here. As you can see, it is just totally black up here, which is wild. Still one of the coolest inks I have ever tried to this day, just because it starts off as this bright yellow and goes all the way black. Then we had Birmingham Pen Company's Antique Sepia. As you can see, chroma shading is definitely present. We have this kind of mossy beige green to this pinky color. It's so, so pretty. Is a bit dry in some pens, I will say that, but as you can see in the Kakimori writing, it just looks beautiful. Then we had Birmingham Pen Company's Weeping Willow. This ink looks very brown in front of me and very green on camera. It's just one of those inks that looks entirely different depending on how you're looking at it. Paper, color of the light, all that kind of good stuff. It's just wild. It looks like it just has some great shading going on right now, but like I mentioned, when you start with the ink, it's one color, and as it dries, it changes color, so I don't know if you can really consider that chroma shading, but to me, it's just fun because it changes color as you're using it. Then we have Diamine Salamander, such an underrated ink in my opinion. You can see the base colors is kind of like dark mossy green, and in the shady bits, it's almost like a teal black. It definitely has a bit of haloing too. I do find that in writing, most of the time only you get the darker colors, but maybe if I find a dry enough pen with a broad enough nib, I'll get some good shading out of it. I don't know, but it's a great ink. And then my newest love, Robert Oster's Earth. Fantastic, nice kind of olivey green brown color with this shading into more of like the pinky beige range. Very common chroma shading color like its neighbor over here, but the flow on this is absolutely fantastic. And with that, we have Sailor Ink Studios 280. Again, kind of like that mossy olive green base color with a bit more of a vibrant pink shade. This color does change or look different on different papers. Midori paper makes this look entirely more brown to me. So it just really depends on, again, paper and lighting for this one too. Then we had Van Diemen's Lost Love Letters. Oh my gosh, I keep saying it backwards. It does look light, I know that, but as you can see, the writing shows up pretty decently and the shading is really pretty in that it goes from this kind of pale green Luna moth color to a bit more of a pink, and it has some more green haloing. I do think on certain papers you even get some browns out of this and even some blues, which is really pretty. I haven't played with it so much yet on all of the papers, but every time I have used it, I've loved it. And like I said, I'm on, I think, sample number 3 now, and I've already ordered a bottle. Then we have Ferris Moss Park Green, and I'm so glad it shaded the way I thought it would. Sometimes it doesn't do it, I don't know. But the color of this is a bit more of like a dusty, mossy green, a cool toned green, and the shading is very gray. It's absolutely lovely, and I don't know. It's a great Ferris ink. It's just, you know, a little bit dry like some of their other inks. And then we have Vinta Sirena. Man, this ink is wild. If you remember when I swatched it wet, it does not look anything like this. It has almost like this baby blue teal base. It's very light, but it also has a bit of a grayness to it, and this pink shading in here. Really beautiful chroma shader. Again, another light one, I realize that, but it does well. It really just does well. Then we have Birmingham Pen Company's Magnolia Mirage, still my favorite pink to this day. We didn't get as much of the gray tones in this one, but we did get some of the orange here in the middle. It's not super striking in terms of chroma shade, but there is different shades in this ink, as you can clearly see, from pink to purple to a little bit more of like that peachy orange color in the center. And then we have Wearingeul's White Rabbit, which is still the most wild shader I think I've ever seen. And then it goes from this very, very, very pale pink, almost like skin tone, to this gray, to this red. It's just really unique. I've found nothing else out there quite like this one. And then we have another new love of mine, Van Diemen's. I really think it's Woollarawarre Bennelong, but I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I do apologize. But the color of this is so cool. It starts off kind of like a gray color, and as it dries, it turns a bit more brown, and it has this very vibrant baby pink shading, along with some teal haloing going on. It's just a really wild looking ink and is absolutely beautiful to work with because its flow is fantastic. Then we had Robert Oster's Polar Vortex. This is an Atlas Stationers exclusive. Again, a bit more of like a dusty purple color, and the shading didn't really quite go all the way down as I wanted it to. I don't think I put enough ink on this one, but it has this kind of gray blue shade to it on some papers, and it's absolutely beautiful. So if you can get your hands on it, definitely recommend this one because it is also another really great legible darker shader. And then we have Robert Oster's Wind, part of my top 5 from 2024. Still love this ink. It's so fabulous. If you like Sailor Manyo Haha or some of the other lighter blue chroma shaders, definitely pick this one up. You will not be disappointed. Then we have Sailor Manyo Fuji, another one of the really great shaders from Sailor. I feel like they have so many, but this one's a great purple lavendery base or lilac-y base with some brighter pink shading and green haloing. Absolutely beautiful, works really well on a pen, and is just a really great ink. Then we have Birmingham Pen Company's Armadillo. On camera, it's pulling a bit more purple, and in person, it's a bit more gray. I do think the shading is not as chroma shady as some of the other ones here, but it does have some nice kind of darker bits of shading, and it's just kind of cool because it changes color as it dries while you're writing. And then same with the Birmingham Pen Company Pennsylvania Fieldstone. It's very similar, these two. One's a bit more pink, one's a bit more purple. And then this one here in the middle is Sailor Ink Studio 252, which is a bit more of like a pink with this darker baby pink shading. And again, that kind of like greenish halo-y situation thing going on. Overall, I think chroma shading inks are absolutely fabulous to play with. There's so many out there. This is literally just a snapshot of the minority of what exists. There are so many. And if you wanted a chroma shader with shimmer, that could be a whole separate video, honestly. But I hope I shared some inks with you that you were either really interested in seeing next to each other or that you were just interested in seeing in general. I'd be happy if you guys want to put your own favorite chroma shaders down in the comments. I think this would be really fun for everybody to kind of share their favorites, and maybe we all have some similar favorites, or we'll be introduced to something new, which is always exciting. So yeah. Anyways, I want to wish you guys the best. I hope you're having a decent or at least a good day. And if not, it'll get better. Just take 10 seconds and think of something happy. I don't know. But wish you the best. Be blessed. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.